So, awesome stuff. All right, so we're going to kind of continue that frame of mind by talking about my perspective on building a launch team. I'm going to be kind of sharing my perspective on that. I like that you're getting different views. You can kind of you'll see certainly some things in common, but some also just different variants on your style of planting. First thing I want to talk about is creating a launch plan. A launch plan is a document that explains what you're doing, why you're doing it. And the document itself will go through various different versions. It may start off with a one-page sheet concept, but the more you dig into what you're trying to do, the more complex that document will get. There are several things that a launch plan answers. The first thing it answers is, why are you planting this church? That is the number one question you're going to get from people who are interested and those that are not interested. Those who might even oppose you. Why are you planting this church? Don't we have enough Adventist churches around here? Why planting this church? Why not help with this other great church here? Why plant Life Bridge when you got Tacoma Southside? Why do that? Well, there's a reason for that. God has called you to reach a people, a segment of the population, a community that's currently not being reached. This answers that question. So for us, when we made the decision 2.5, 3 years ago to launch a campus of Belchville Church in Washington, D.C., there's like 8 churches Adventist churches in D.C. And so people began asking, why plant another church? Because as awesome as those churches are, they weren't necessarily targeting the young adult professionals. And we wanted to reach the young adult professionals. So those churches that are there are amazing, they're awesome, they're being used by God to do outstanding stuff. We're not in any way competing with them, but we wanted to reach a whole segment of the population that was essentially not being targeted. And in order to get one church per 25,000, we need to have 8 more churches in Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia. And so we're looking to just get one of those. All right, so it answers, why are you planting this church? Who are you trying to reach? Who are you trying to reach? Now, there may be a church in a 25,000 population, and there may be another one in a 25,000 population, and another 25,000 population. There may be enough like that, but then when you pull back further, you might realize that there's no Filipino church in that entire 100,000 population. And there's a number of Filipino, there's more than 25,000 Filipino households in there, and nobody's reaching them. And that's with a number of segments. And so you might want to try to reach them. You might have churches that are there doing amazing things, but as Dustin and others have shared, maybe kind of targeting the older generation. And you want to be able to reach some of the youngers. And Dustin's absolutely right. You're trying to reach the younger generation. If you have that attitude, we don't do things around that, they are going to respect, the younger generation is going to respect the older generation, and they'll just keep their mouth shut and they'll walk. It's absolutely true. So who are you trying to reach? Who's going to be planting with you? Who's going to be planting with you? And this answered in several ways. So are you a volunteer lay pastor? Are you a pastor, paid? Is there going to be any volunteer lay pastors if you're a pastor with you? Is there a mother church that is partnering with you? I think it's important to put in this document that you are supported by the Washington Conference or Northern California Conference or Nevada-Utah Conference or whatever conference you are a part of, that's in there, so people know you're not just some weird thing, but you actually are getting the support from them. How much is it going to cost? This you may not have early on. You'll have various different versions of this document. But later on, you'll have a better idea with this, right? We talked about when you have your launch day, and you now have the picture of what this is going to look like, depending on the model of church that you're going to have. Now, when you backpedal from there, you realize all the costs and expenses it's going to be to launch on that day. You want to put that in not detailed, specific line-by-line item, but overall general categories, what it's going to cost for you to be able to launch this. I'll explain why that's important in a minute. And how is it going to be funded? That's a great thing that the North American Division, Pastor Jose, the ministerial team of the North American Division did a great job really fighting to get some church planting resources. out to local churches. It's a great head start. Washington Conference and I know Northern California Conference have resources to help, but you're going to need to find some other income sources. Your launch team, those who are joining you, will begin helping, but you may have to find some other places of doing that. That's something this document may answer. What kind of church will it be? What kind of church will it be? Is it going to be a home church? Is it going to be a larger church? Are you going to be more of a contemporary style, more of a traditional style? Although don't fall into the traditional contemporary categories. It's not about that. But it's identifying who you're trying to reach, and so therefore this is the kind of church it's going to be in order to reach these kinds of people. So people say, oh, I didn't realize it was going to be in Chinese. But that's who we're trying to reach. So how will you build your launch team? How are you going to build that launch team? So you have you with a vision today, and you're going to have a team of people that when that church goes to grand opening, how are you going to build that in there? So this launch plan answers those questions. The purpose of the launch plan, you want to have something clear and concise in writing. This is it's a document, and again, it'll take many different forms. Clear and concise in writing. This is who we are. This is what we're doing. This is where we're going. It focuses your vision. This helps you focus your vision, because eventually you're going to get people with lots of ideas of things to do, and you need to be able to say, but this is what we're about. But this is what we're about. But this is what we're about. Especially when you get those people with their personal agendas, and they always show up. They love coming to church plants because there's a chance for them to get in the ground floor to do what matters to them. Fundraising mechanism. This is an outstanding fundraising mechanism. Here's one of the obstacles that you will have, aside from finding the facility, which is a huge obstacle. Funding is a big obstacle. The conference, the union, the division, we have some resources that we make available, but it's not going to be enough to launch, and then you need to have a yearly budget to go from there forward. You want to have this document in order to help you raise funds. Because you'll have the opportunity to sit down with people who in no way are going to be part, personally, of your church plant. But because you're trying to reach this segment of the population, they're willing to help fund you do that. Because they believe in your mission. They believe in your vision. And though they might not even live in your state, they'd be willing to help financially contribute. And so when you have a really nice, concise, well-explained, nice-looking document with the budget in there that explains what it costs, you'll have the opportunity to sit down with some people, potential donors, and ask them if they could be willing to help financially make this happen. It's a huge, huge resource to do that. It's a great recruiting tool. Here's what we're doing. Here's a basic idea of what we're trying to accomplish, where we're trying to accomplish it, etc. Look it over. I'll get in touch with you, or get in touch with me, and we can maybe sit down sometime for lunch or coffee or via Zoom or whatever, and talk about it in greater detail, and I can answer any questions you have of what we're doing and how we're trying to do this. It is also a great way to get feedback from experienced church planters. Feel free to send them to, I know I like to receive your launch plans. Send it to me. I'll read it over. I'll send you 10, 12 questions back just asking. Have you considered putting this in, or what about that? Maybe elaborate a little bit on that. I know Steve likes to get these documents as well. I don't want to speak for Dustin, but do you want to send them to other people who are planting or experienced church planters to say, what am I missing? And it's really helpful to get those missing segments. So at Beltsville Church, we were launching, as a result of COVID, we were launching an online campus. It's a campus specifically designed to reach people throughout the world, and it was going to be church. It wasn't a gateway to a physical service. It was the service. It was the church. Not just a worship service. They had small groups. They did ministry. They did all this kind of stuff. And so we decided we were going to launch it as a full-on campus, not just something to get us through COVID. Not just an alternative to coming to church. It was church. And so we created a launch plan for this. And it was very helpful in recruiting. I sent it out to to other church planters and say, what am I missing? And I had some real creative graphs to illustrate our discipleship process online and how it can eventually move to, if there's enough people in a community, a whole on-campus of Beltsville Church somewhere. And I sent it to Steve Letty, and Steve's like, contacts me back, I don't understand this, I don't understand that. In my mind, it made sense. But when I put it on paper, it didn't transfer from here to here. So if I send it to somebody else, I'm like, oh, I see what you're thinking now, and it gave me a chance to elaborate on that. So it's very helpful for that. Of course, it helps with your priority focus. Helps you just kind of zoom in on what's the priority, what's the important factors, what needs to happen. And then, of course, helps monitor your progress. Where are we at? How are we doing? Are we getting all the funds that we need? Are we getting the number of people we need? Are we progressing it to the grand opening, etc.? Eventually, your launch plan will include a calendar, kind of a timeline. Not at first, in time. The document kind of develops. Well, Beltsville Church, we're a multi. They are. I was there. A multi-site church. So we're one church with campuses, and each campus kind of functions. It's not my purpose of being here, but just kind of give you a quick explanation. Each campus kind of functions as a church in a district, although it's one church, one mission, one vision, one budget, a lead pastor, campus pastors over each of them. They all have the flexibility to do ministry in their own way, but we're all one entire church. And we were looking to launch a campus in Washington, D.C. So I put together, unfortunately during my sabbatical, not a good idea, I put together the launch plan, our mission, our vision, what we were trying to accomplish. This is what it looked like on the front. And this document was very helpful in helping to not only clarify the vision to our current membership, though they had voted that they wanted to do this is something they wanted to do, to help clarify for them. It was also a very helpful tool to explain to other churches in the area why we're doing this. We gave it to them. Here's what we're doing, and helped explain why we're doing what we're doing, why we're going to be planting a church down the street from you. And it was a very helpful resource for fundraising. Your experience won't be ours, but we got a lot of funding. That if we do it right, if they do it right, they'll be able to plant maybe even 2 more campuses after this one. And when we got a substantial gift to help make this happen, because people are like, we need to have a church like this in Washington, D.C., and we will help fund this. When the conference office heard about it, they said, that's enough money to cover a full-time salary. And I said, you're right. And they said, so you can hire a pastor if you want to do that. And I said, you're right, but that's not what I want to do. I want you to match that gift as a conference. And I want you to provide that full-time salary for that campus so we can use these funds to not only plant this campus, but potentially 2 more. And when I mentioned that I think I mentioned it to the ministerial director first, he laughed. He said, Tim, we only have so many FTEs, full-time equivalents, We only have so many. We don't have extra full-time salaries sitting around. We can't just give you another full-time salary. And I said, I know that. I understand that. I know that if you chose to do this, it would be a sacrifice somewhere else. But I just want you to think about it. I took several months. He had this plan. Sat down with the president for breakfast one day, and I said the same thing to him. And he said, we just can't do that. I said, listen, I know. I've been on executive committees. I've been a ministerial director. I've been in this conference long enough that I know that there are places in this conference where you are wasting an FTE. Wow, good for you. I know. It's happened. It's reality. I'm telling you that if you invest here, you won't regret it. And the president said, you know what, you're right. If the ministerial director okays it, I'm okay with it. So then I got together again with the ministerial director. And I said, president's okay with it, if you are. Mom said I could go out. He says he's okay with it if you are. And I know it's tough. And I mean, I'm being respectful, of course. And he became a friend of mine and still is a friend of mine, whom I greatly respect and love and appreciate. But I said, eventually came down to over several months saying, this is where you want to invest. You know this is what we're about as a conference. You know this is where you know we need a church like this in the capital of the United States. And eventually he came back to me and he said, all right, we have the salary for you. And we're going to have to take it from somewhere else. I'm not going to tell you where. And a couple of weeks later, somebody moved out of a church and they didn't replace them. And so I kind of figured out where that came from. As a result of that, we hired Pastor Joanne Cortez to be the campus pastor of this new church, who now, as you heard, has over 100 people in their preview services. I think this document helped really provide that momentum. So when the conference office said, we're willing to give that salary, they saw that we were serious, we were organized, it wasn't just a flippant idea, that they were willing to invest in that. And then we had other people step forward to provide investing, not just in D.C., but the entire concept and movement. So it's really an important document. I want to give you a gift on my website, missionalchurchleadership.com. Write that down, take a picture. missionalchurchleadership.com. Under resources, you'll see a category called launch plans. You'll see a copy of the DC launch plan. It has since changed since then. It's evolved. It is an evolving document, but you'll see the one that we started with. Obviously, it was done pre-COVID, and launch date has moved, and other dynamics have changed, but you'll see it there, and a whole bunch of others that I have found to be very helpful, good ideas. You'll need to create your own, but you can kind of see the basic categories of things that you'll want to look at. And I tell you, if it looks good, it will really help in the funding and approval process. You go to an executive committee that's looking to approve you as a company or a group or whatever, and you just have some things written down on a piece of paper versus a really nice document. People look at that and they say, they're serious. It makes a difference. So it is a great recruiting and, of course, fundraising tool. So now, recruiting and training your launch team. This is a little different perspective than other people have. This is a plan that I've used and it's worked pretty well. Jesus said that he was going to build his church, right? He's going to build his church. And when he talked about the harvest, he said that the harvest is plentiful, but the workers or laborers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. You and I need to be praying not for the harvest, not for the reaping, not for the church, but for the workers. The harvest is plentiful. The potential is huge. The problem is not that the world is so wicked and pagan and that the devil has such a stronghold on it. Jesus promised the gates of hell will not prevail against his church. The problem is the workers, the people who believe that it can happen. So this is where you want to pray. This is where you want to fast. This is where you want to seek discernment in pulling together workers to harvest that. Now, there's some terms I just want to define the difference between a launch team and a core team. I use the terms personally interchangeably, but academically speaking, that's incorrect. So I just want to clarify for you the technical definitions. A launch team is a group of people who buy into an established vision and help to launch the church. A core team is a group of people committed to planting a church that help develop the vision. So these are two different approaches. Neither is wrong. I tend to use the launch team paradigm more than the core team paradigm. So when I have my launch plan, the document, the vision is all laid out. What we're doing, how we're doing it, the general principles, that's all. Who we're trying to reach, where we're trying to reach, when we're trying to reach, that's all already figured out. I'm looking to recruit a team of people to help launch this new church or campus. Now, some people like to follow more of the core team model, where we've got this vision to plant a church here, and they start getting people together, and then once they get kind of a mass of, 6, 12, however many people, they then say, how are we wanting to do this? And they help develop that strategy. Neither are wrong. They both work. For me, I lean more towards the launch plan model. This is just mine. Not saying you need to do that. I lean more towards the launch plan model because I have a specific vision that I want to accomplish. And I want to equip and train and develop people to fulfill that vision. I struggle with people getting on board and spending weeks fighting over a name or a mission or parsing words. I just don't want to take the time for that. That's just my impatience for that. Some people like to do that and wrestle through with that. Here's what we're doing. Who wants to become part of what we're doing? There's lots of room to work out the details. Lots of planning and execution that have to take place. So, for the launch team, that's kind of what I'm thinking. A launch team is a group of individuals who believe in the vision that God has given. So when you're looking for a launch team, you're wanting to find people that buy into the vision. This group of people, this team, are going to help launch this new church. And this group establishes the expectations of worship, discipleship, and service. Remember, you're not just launching a worship service, you are launching a church that is discipling people. The details of what worship's going to be like because of who we're trying to reach, what the discipleship process is going to be like. You'll have broad strokes, but you'll need to work out those details and who we serve in the community. All those details, this team helps to work out and establish the expectations. Here's one of the most important factors. I know Steve's mentioned it. Dustin just mentioned it a moment ago. A launch team is by invitation only and is comprised of people who are completely on board with the planter and the vision of the church, including its theology and philosophy of ministry. You do not want people on the team that are not fully committed to it. And I promise you, it is going to be incredibly tempting for you to do otherwise. Because you are praying, Lord, give me harvesters for the harvest. Give me workers for the harvest. Please bring the laborers. And then somebody comes forward that has money or influence or has talent, but they have their own agenda. Or they want to do things their own way. And it's going to be tough for you to say, this is not for you. And you might be tempted to just keep them on board, but you will have problems later. I wished I had known this when I planted my first church. I wish I'd known this. The first church I planted was in Olympia, Washington. I was pastor of Lacey Church. We were growing, vibrant, 2 services. The next step was to plant a church. We planted it in Hawks Prairie. And I just said, whoever wants to be part of this, let's do this. Come on board. And I led anybody and everybody on. And I let this guy who was an elder of the original Lacey Church on board. And he always helped with PA. He was a leader, so I let him on board. But because we were targeting the younger generation, our music was different. And he was literally back at the PA board all the time, trying to adjust the sound from the worship team to make it sound less contemporary. It sounded horrible. So the worship team were like, dude, you're not doing this right. And he was like constantly negative. And then he started going back to the mother church and talking about all the horrible things that we were doing over there. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? And he eventually, we had this church come to us. And they were building a brand new facility. They came to us, the mother church, and Lacey, and said, we're building this church just down the street, and we've sold our old one, but it's going to be 6 months till we move into the new one. Can we rent your facility? Now, our church was anti-renting to Babylon. We don't rent to Babylon. Why would we provide our facility to people who are teaching Sunday worship? So they were anti this, but I managed to convince them, let's serve these people for 6 months. So they came in, they worshiped for the 6 months. Well, when we were looking to plant this new church in Hawks Prairie where they were at, we went to them and said, can we worship in your facility? They're like, yeah, of course. You were so gracious to us. We'll rent to you on Saturdays. But that one guy had to have his drink there on the PA system. And their PA guy's like, dude, you can't have your drink. It's the policy. You can't have your drink there. He got us kicked out of that facility. And it was just horrible. It was a bad experience. It was like overnight. And like we had to quickly find something else. And we were in a school gymnasium. We were in the Elks Club. And I mean, like big giant elk on the wall kind of stuff. Worship Jesus. Sacrifice. And I wished I had known this. If I had known this, I would have said, this isn't for you. This isn't for you. I didn't know that. Purpose of your training. So once you're getting your team on board, you want to begin training them. Now, depending on your model, you have a core team. They develop the mission, the vision, and then you start recruiting the launch team, however you want to do it. Or in our case, we have the mission and the vision. We recruit people. Once we get to a certain mass, we begin training. And the goal is to create a combined DNA. So we are casting vision. This is what we're doing. This is how we're doing. This is our heart. So we are communicating to them, this is not for us, this is for the community. This church is not for us, it's to reach the lost. This is what we want. Now some people, when the training begins, they opt out. And we say, that's all right, we'll keep you in touch with you, and you're welcome to come to our grand opening and be a part of it then. But they're not part of this team. Fostering fellowship. We want these people to connect. This was a mistake that I made when we launched the first campus of Beltsville Church. Large church, doing really well, multiple services, and we decided we were going to launch a campus. And most of the people from this campus came from the original Beltsville Church. So we really kind of cut down in how much time we spend in fellowship together. Because all of them, 75% of them knew each other. And so we really cut down on that. So when we ended up having this grand opening, it was awesome, it was great. Tech Road campus, it's amazing, it's wonderful, it still is. But we all of a sudden realized that they all know each other, but they're not really connected together. They weren't part of the same social network together. And immediately it became clear that we undermined ourselves by not spending more time in fellowship. It was vision casting, it was serving, it was planning, it was execution, and we just kind of assumed everybody was friends with each other. They knew each other, most of them, but we didn't have that time for fellowship and connecting. And so do not undercut that. At training, you are, in many cases, if you just assume everybody understands what it means to be a disciple, how to disciple, and just let everybody just bring what their previous experience is, you're going to have whatever their previous church experience was. So we do training. And when we train people, we train them on spiritual gifts, we train them on our discipleship strategy, we train them on the community that we're trying to reach, we train them on what it means to love the least of these. We just train. And as we bring new people on, we make sure we train them, continuing to train. Training literally never stops. And then expanding the launch team. As we're doing the training, preparing for the launch, training on a weekly basis, we're encouraging people to invite other people to come. And we catch them up with the training, and they're recruiting new people. So when we start with 20 or 25 people on our launch team, it ends up building to 50 some people on our launch team. And once we get to about 50, that's when we launch our pre-launch phase. And Steve, I don't know if you're talking about that this weekend, but okay. The pre-launch phase that we end up going from 50 to 100 people before we even launch, which is where Joanne is at now. So the launch team, this is what they're committed to. This is what we ask people to commit to be on the team. One is praying. Praying for the community, praying for more people to become members of our launch team, to become part of this, and praying for their unchurched friends, family, etc. Giving. We ask them to start giving to the church. As soon as we're set up to financially receive those funds, we're asking them to start giving. Training. You have to come to the training. When we begin our weekly launch team training, we need to have you there and participating. Use their gifts and talents in ministry. Right? Eventually, there'll be people who will come to just check things out. They'll come in, they'll see things, they'll have worship, they'll grab a bagel, and they'll leave. That's not our core team. Core team are using their gifts and talents in ministry. and then reaching out to their unchurched friends and associates. We educate and educate, train, train, train. You are a missionary, and where you live, where you work, where you go to school is your God-given mission field. Here's how you reach them, here's how you connect with them, and here's how you used by God to help disciple them in the process. So our lunch team process, we have weekly gatherings throughout COVID. They've been via Zoom. Spiritual formation, a part of our weekly gathering is taking time to make sure they understand how to have a relationship with Jesus Christ, how to pray, how to study the Bible, how to have a walk with Christ, etc. So one of the things that we've used is the book Experiencing God, and we'll just go through it together. Go through a chapter each time we gather together as a way of just bringing awareness. You can use whatever source you want. Systems development, right? We talked about systems already. You know, we talked about the worship system, the hospitality system, etc. We go through the details of that. So when we cast the vision, we know that when you become part of this church, you're becoming part of a church that is committed to hospitality. The details of all of that, the launch team works that out. We work out the details. Well, how's the best way to do that? And how's the best way to do that? We work out the details of that. Lots of time for developing the systems. Here are some of the key mistakes. If you forgot everything else that I've shared, note these. And I say mistakes because I've been through the experience myself. These are mistakes I have made. Recruiting people with wrong motives. When you sit down and have a conversation with them, and you're sharing with them the vision, the mission, you start asking questions. What's your church experience? What about this sounds interesting to you, etc. And you're listening for concepts and phrases about their motive for becoming part of this. Well, because I hate everybody at the church I'm at now. Right? Or the church I'm at now is boring. Well, what does that mean to you? It's boring. Well, I'm excited that this one's going to have worship services that I like. You want to dig into that a little bit more, understand that motive a little bit more. We might invite them to become part of this, but not necessarily the core team. So understanding their motive. But because here's my chance to do my ministry. All the other churches won't let me do my, health ministry or whatever ministry it might be. But here, I've got this ministry I'm willing to give you, or I can preach at your church. Literally had somebody show up. I want to become part of your church so I can be one on your preaching team. Thanks, no thanks. Too little time developing your leaders. You are going to be so busy getting everything done for that the temptation will be, we went through the training once and we're done. And the training was 5 weeks or something. No, training is always happening. It's always going, always training, always training. No intentional ministry placement process. Remember, every individual who has come to Christ has been given gifts by the Spirit. And your church should have a process of discerning what those gifts are and placing those people in ministry. Great, you want to become part of our launch team. Awesome, great. You're on board. On board with what? What are their gifts? What has God called them to be part of this body to do? How do you discover that? How do you place them into specific ministries? Not having a leadership pipeline. This is a key. We just have a bunch of people doing stuff and not having a leadership pipeline. So for leadership pipeline looks like this. So you have different levels of involvement in the church. We start with what we call a ministry grid. It is not the nominated committee process. It's just so people understand how we do certain things. So you have a Sabbath school superintendent, or whatever it may be called, who oversees the children's ministries of Sabbath school. Within that, you might have, as you're launching, you might have 3 different levels of children's Sabbath school. The youngest children, the elementary school children, and the high school kids. Maybe that's what you start with. You have a leader over each one of them. And then in them, you have a staff of people that serve. Your leadership pipeline is that you are constantly looking for people who are serving in those departments. Well, first, you're looking for new people that you can recruit to serve in your children's ministries. And then you're looking for people who could not just serve, but amongst those who are serving, who could become leaders of these departments, and among those leaders, who can be superintendents. And so you're constantly working because eventually people move. And if your Sabbath school superintendent is the only one who knows how to do everything, you're going to be in trouble when he or she leaves. So you're constantly moving that system. Everything has that. Your AV system, your worship teams, your service projects, everything has that leadership pipeline, and you're constantly developing new leaders. What's beautiful about this is once you reach, 150, 200, however many people it is, you have all of these leaders that are equipped and trained so you can send them to plant other churches. And then, huge, no second layer of leadership. So when you develop your ministry grid that says, in order to have our launch day, in order to have ministry, here's all of the things, the positions we need to have filled to do this. Now again, our focus isn't on like a nominating committee list. Our focus is on the people, but we know we need X number of people to run hospitality. We know we need X number of people to run the children's ministries for grand opening. And let's just say for the sake of illustration that you need 50 people to do everything that needs to happen on grand opening. Then you need not 50, but 100. Because once you launch, you'll start losing your core team. I know, it sounds crazy. Within 2 years, you'll lose 50% of your core team. This was why the South Sound Seventh-day Adventist Church failed in Olympia, Washington. We had all the training, all the prep, focused on spiritual gifts, had all of our systems, and we needed about 50 people to launch. And when we launched, it launched amazing. We had the Sabbath school classes, we had worship teams that sometimes sounded a little weird, but once the PA guy was gone, that was better. And we had so many guests coming and doing evangelistic series and people making decisions and baptisms and baby dedications and outreach and service. It was amazing. And then all of a sudden, the worship leader gets a call into full-time ministry. So he and his wife moved to another state to become pastoral family. Who's the backup? There was no backup. I'd spent all my energy in developing he and his family and that worship team. So we scrambled. Well, let's get these people. Let's get them up there. Okay, they're up there. They're good. And then all of a sudden, our church clerk and our head elder, who was also in charge of personal ministries and superintendent in Sabbath school, right? Everybody kind of had a weekly responsibility and a Sabbath responsibility. She got a promotion that moved her to Vancouver, Washington. And so immediately we lost both of them. So who's going to do those things? Those are key things you need to have. Who's going to do those things? We hadn't trained other people to do that. We trained them to do that. So we pulled other people to do that. And every time somebody moved away, like the guy who was running the PA, he and his wife went back to the mother church. Many people just moved. Who had to fill in those positions? Current launch team members. So then it became, I can't do 4 things. Well, then no longer do this. And no longer do this. And then when we lost our facility, it just began this downward cycle. And the biggest mistake I made was that I hadn't developed a leadership pipeline or a second layer of leadership. So when we launched the Tech Road campus 5 years ago, I told the campus pastor, listen, we need to have about 50 people to launch this thing, which means we need 100 people to launch this thing. He's like, why? He says, because we're going to lose people. No way. Yeah. It's going to break our hearts when they leave. But they're going to leave. We don't know who they are. They're going to leave. The young adult lawyer who was a huge push for this. I mean, he had this vision before I even showed up. Right? He was one of the very first that says we need to be planting a church and looking for a church planter. Lots of money, lots of influence, heavily involved in ministry, young adult, amazing talent. He gets a new job in California. Devastated us. He's the last person. He'd lived there his entire life, was doing great as a lawyer there. He would never leave. We would never have guessed he'd been the one to leave. And when it left, we were all heartbroken. But we had a second layer of leadership. Other people just stepped right in place. People just transitioned nicely in place, and we're constantly doing that. I think that's one of the primary reasons church plants fail, is because they focus on this group. And then when people move, because it happens, then they've put all their energy into this and not in that process, development process. So, all right, I know I kind of went a little bit over, I think, I'm not sure. So any questions? All righty.
Well, that was good stuff. It's good to learn. It's good to learn. It's good to learn so that we don't repeat some of those mistakes. I know they're hard when you go through them, and they're frustrating, and it can be sleepless nights, but we don't have to repeat those mistakes. Any thoughts or questions for Pastor Tim when it comes to really the importance of training and equipping your core team? Oh, got a gentleman right here. Let me come on over.
Thank you. I am just so impressed with both presentations. And what really stands out to me is that for those of us that are not in full-time ministry like you, what I've heard you actually say, though you haven't said it, is that you are calling for a level of excellence that we often neglect in the church. If you look at how we do it out in the world, and you'd actually somewhat say that we all work, the dentist example, right? That also hit me because I'm in ministry at my job, but just how we execute our job duties, it's amazing. I have a very hefty, busy schedule and job, huge responsibilities, and no nonsense. How I lead, how I train my teams, how we look at the mission and live it, and how we drive our teams, and we understand our PIs, performance indicators, very, very well. Yeah. So this level of commitment and passion in our team, I mean, we don't fight each other. We look at each other and we know what we are going after every day. But yet when we come to church, we tolerate mediocrity. We let people in wrong positions, and everybody's afraid of offending everybody. And I'm not saying we should offend people, right, but I think we should also pray for the gift of communication in such a way that we can still uplift each other and move each other. And so I'm just thoroughly humbled and impressed with how both of you have laid out how we ought to run ministry. And I think if we do, I think this is probably the biggest missing component in the church today. I think so. Because we have everything we need. Everything. All of us here, wonderful professionals out there. These are leaders. Amazing accomplishment out in the world. But in the church, we come by, sit in the corner, and we are okay with just this much. Out there, I am not okay with this much.
Yeah. Good enough. Not okay. We are not okay with good enough.
God, we should give God our very best. Very best.
Yes, you mentioned that training is always happening. So after you have two layers of leadership. However, when he leaves, the position is already there. So how does training look like when you said training is always happening? After launching, do you still do that? Do you send them with a new person? How does that?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in several ways. First, so let's say my training is, 30 weeks of content, whatever, just for the sake of example. And my launch team has come to a certain mass, so we start the training. At the end of the 30 weeks, we're not done training. The formal part of it might be done, but now we're focusing on all these other aspects of training. But maybe 10 weeks in, somebody new starts. So then now we're training that person or getting a group together and training those people. And we have people in the original team training them. And then once we launch, everybody's being trained through our membership classes, through our small group classes. As members are our leaders are training those underneath them and how we do what we do. So in our hospitality, when somebody says, yeah, I'll join the hospitality team, we explain to them why, in our case, why we have the food out that we have out, why we don't have quiche out for Sabbath. There's a reason for that. The food that we have doesn't require a fork or a knife. It's just, there's a reason for everything we do in our hospitality team, and those people are being mentored and trained in how to do that, so that when my wife just left, she was kind of in charge of the hospitality, somebody stepped into place to do that.